Hello, my friends, and welcome back to Alien Protocols. Let's dive into the weeds, shall we? If we're going to dive into the reality that it's indisputable that psychokinesis exists, which is really stunning, then let's look at some of the details. Let's look at some of the nuts and bolts and possible mechanisms, because it's taken us a while to get here, gang. But from the very beginning, with the ET contact and CE5 stuff, we realize that it's the lower mind, the subconscious mind, making contact, and that this has been proven to work time and time again if you just do the research. And with all of these abilities of psi, ESP, and psychokinesis, it's that same lower subconsciousness that's able to tap into this space, this place that has this universal interconnectivity. And the most stunning example of all of the different abilities of the subconscious mind to tap into this area are psychokinesis. And psychokinesis is the ability to affect matter from a distance, change it, teleport it, move it from one place to another, break it, weaken it, strengthen it. Inanimate objects and living creatures. This ability is really stunning, and it has so many ethical considerations and huge responsibility issues for humanity to confront. The research on this has been just staggering. So much research. It's really incredible. And some of the research is just mind-boggling. Retrocausal psychokinesis. It's one thing to use the power of your mind to affect the broad statistical curve of a random number generator. That's, one thing. But to be able to snap a match that's inside of a box, inside of a box, inside of a box, that's a whole nother level of psychokinesis. But as our kind of theory that we talk about on this channel, with remote viewing, it's about a connection to that place. It's about a connection. And in that connection, you can see. But that connection is the same connection that makes other things possible, like healing or psychokinesis. So it's this connection to that substructure. Advanced civilizations understand the structure of the universe, and that part of the substructure of the universe is this place that you can tap into and have this incredible transparency in data and power and abilities and interconnectivity. So although it appears like a lot of different phenomena, it's just different facets of the same underlying shape. But still, psychokinesis is wild. It's absolutely wild and stunning. And after many experiments, they've made some discoveries, and there's some hypotheses about it. And I want to talk about them with you guys and explore some of the nitty-gritty discoveries they've made. Because there's not just been one or two studies on this, there's been hundreds of studies. And remember, almost for 100 years in the 1900s, they studied just dice experiments for literally decades and decades and decades. So there's the equivalence hypothesis, which means briefly that a psychokinesis success rate is independent of the random number generator, provided that the psychological conditions are constant and the random decisions are truly random. So if everything's psychologically normal and everything's fine and the random number generator is random, psychokinesis's success rate appears to be independent of the actual machine. That's a really intense notion. And I've heard other ways of saying the same kind of notion. And that notion is that psychokinesis doesn't just affect the object, it affects the whole statistical curve. And how they were able to prove that is a meta-analysis of psychokinesis studies. And they found out if someone did really well in one area, they did poorly in another. And it always, in meta-analysis, always balanced out for some reason. So that's interesting. But some of these hypotheses can be studied, and we can rule that out. Then we can move forward, getting closer and closer to the mechanism that's at work here. And maybe PK might just be the aspect where we can find the mechanism easiest because it's so demonstrative, you know? And that mechanism might give us insight into everything. There is the weak violation hypothesis, and that means basically that PK never violates the major laws of the universe. It can only, you know, affect the outcome of quantum processes that are usually random. It doesn't mean free will, it means that they can operate in that random space, essentially. So if they never break big phenomena, they can just operate in quantum realities, probabilistically, essentially. And that's a cool hypothesis. I think a lot of people like that. I think it fits a lot of the study's conclusions. You know, it sounds good, right? So those are interesting hypotheses, aren't they? And they have been studied and explored, and so have some of these other ones that are about to chat about right now. One is the teleological psi model, and this one's really interesting. It basically says that psi works, telekinesis works. And let me go backwards for a second. In the case that they're talking about here, Schmidt did a bunch of these studies, and Dr. Schmidt did a whole bunch of them, and they did them with pre-recorded events. So essentially the psychokinesis was retrocausal. The people participating in the experiments thought they were happening now with the random number generators, but they actually were selected previously and recreated. And the psychics were really affecting the past, and somehow they're able to prove that they did affect the past. So they're trying to figure out, how did they do this? And there was two different models of psi to explain it. And one is a teleological model, and that basically says that information goes backwards in time. There's reverse causality. The information goes backwards in time and affects the outcome. Okay, so the psychic is able to go backwards in time, and then that information travels forward. Now then there's another one, and this one's very appealing too, and it's the quantum collapse theory. And that is basically that, you know, nature doesn't make a final decision until you look, and then it finally makes the decision. So in places where nature hasn't made that final decision yet, psi loves to play in those areas. And we've talked about this on this channel before, giving the universe space to play. We've talked about that before, especially with psi, haven't we? It's interesting to hear this notion about it. Anyway, the universe then, once it's observed, will collapse, and the outcome will happen. So the psychokinetic outcome will happen, it'll be documented, and that's, you know, the quantum collapse. The probabilities collapsed into one reality. And that works really well too. And how that would work is they had a way to try and tell between the two of these which one was true. And it was a really cool experiment. The experiment was simple. Why don't you try one test with two different people and see if the first person does better all the time? And if it's true, if they both do the same all the time, then maybe it's more indicative of a teleological model, because they're able to travel backwards in time each time and change the future for themselves. So it'd be the percentage of their success should be the same between both people if they did it in a row on one test. But if there's a difference between the two, dramatic, where the first person did better and the second person did dramatically worse consistently over time, that would be indicative of the quantum collapse model, meaning that the first person collapsed the probability and the reality materialized, and then the second telekinetic who came in and tried to affect it had a more difficult time because reality had already been collapsed. And the crazy, wacky thing they discovered is the second is true, is that a second psychic trying the same experiment will fail dramatically, even if they're really good psychics. So I thought that was really, really cool. And this leads me to another series of experiments that were done by the pair research group that were really interesting. Entropy seems to be something that's heavily involved in all of these phenomena, from extraterrestrials to psychokinesis to remote viewing. Entropy has a big thing to do with all of these. And it could be back to what we were talking about before, how this substructure of the universe, like branches of a tree, you know, at the top of the tree, if we only could see from above the tree, it would look so weird. Everything would be different and separate. But when you see the tree from the side, you see everything comes together and is connected by branches. And they come down and connect to larger and larger and larger branches. Until you get to one big trunk and discover that everything is actually connected. And it's a substructure to the universe that you just can't tell from above. And maybe the Lyman is like that, this substructure to the universe that we just can't tell, but it's the unification of all these different things. But in this substructure of the universe, entropy is different. It might be like the trunk of a tree, wider, bigger, and therefore entropy is lower there because it's in a greater state of order. It could be a lower entropy state there, and that's why a lot of this phenomena may happen when there's a crossover. Entropy is a very fascinating aspect of this, of all of the different phenomena. ET phenomena, there's a lot of notions that when CE5 groups come together in love and caring and cohesive group activity, they dramatically reduce the entropy in the area, and that ETs can detect that as well. So there's a lot of notions about groups, and there's a fascinating thing about cohesive groups. At Pair Research Labs, they did a bunch of studies with the Global Consciousness Program and random number generators. And of all the different experiments they did, one of the most statistically significant experiments they did was with taking random number generators to different locations. And the places where they reacted the most were with cohesive groups. Not just groups of people. If you took it to a mall where there was a bunch of people doing all sorts of different independent things, the machines were basically normal. But if you took them to locations where large groups of people were doing something cohesive, meaning like watching an opera or everyone's doing the same prayer or something like that, that the random number generators were wildly abnormal. And that happened time and time and time again. And I think what's happening is the entropy that normally would be in each individual, because they're all doing it, they're all in a greatly reduced entropy state. That entropy they normally would have maybe is floating around. It's potential entropy, and anything in that immediate area can pick up that entropy, like the random number generator. Or maybe when a group of people are praying, they see a giant thing like Fatima. Entropy gets so low, they're able to collapse an incredibly rare quantum possibility. Who knows? It's fascinating thought though, isn't it? We know if you look at the studies and evidence that this stuff is real. How does it work? It works somehow. There is some substructure to reality we don't completely understand. What do you guys think it is? And how does it work? I would love to hear what you guys think about that. Much love, guys. If I can figure out how to turn this off, if anyone can, please let me know. Much love.